All right, welcome to another episode of the Political Playbook. I'm Wyatt, and this is my co-host Darren. And
Hello, hello.
let's go ahead and hop right into it. So these tariffs appear to have been, I'm not gonna say resolved, but they've at least been postponed. What have you been hearing? What have you been reading?
Yeah, well, it looks like in the final hour they've come to a resolution. I think both countries, Canada and Mexico, have agreed to send like 10,000 troops, roughly, apiece, to their respective borders with us. And I guess for Mexico's part, they're going to try and curb the illegal aliens as well as fentanyl trafficking. And as for the Canadians, I guess they're going to curb their very small amount of uh, fentanyl being brought over the border. Uh, it's kind of a, I mean, I guess I'll just go into my thoughts on it. Uh, the Mexico, you know, the deal with Mexico seems a little more warranted, or a lot more warranted than the deal with Canada. I mean, I saw something online saying that the pounds of fentanyl that we intercepted from the Canadian border, like last year, was like in, in the double digits, so like 43 or
That's the
something,
number I keep saying as well, 43 pounds.
which I mean, I guess, you know, 43 pounds could theoretically kill a lot of people, but we're talking about many, many, many thousand pounds that are coming over the Mexican border. So to treat both countries basically the same and then ask for the same resolution of,
Right.
10,000 roughly true. I mean, this program is going to actually, I saw a figure, it's going to cost like over $1 billion for Canada to mobilize all these troops and then for all the other things they're going to put in place. And it seems like uh, I'll say one last thing and then I'll send it to you because I'm kind of monopolizing it. But it seems like, as far as Canada goes, we've just kind of expended a lot of social capital for no reason, really. I mean, I think, you know, different measures could have been taken. But anyways, your thoughts?
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off of what you said, the 43 pounds is what gets sent from Canada to America in fentanyl. Do you have any idea what that pounds is in from Mexico to the United States? If you were to just throw a wild guess out there.
I I'm going to guess it's in the hundreds of thousands, but I could be mistaken.
Yeah, not quite that much, but it's roughly around 20,000 pounds, a little bit more.
Oh, okay, so much
Yeah,
less than
sig-
I even
yeah,
I conceived. So,
which make no, I mean, 20,000 pounds is a ridiculous amount of fentanyl. I mean, you're talking about that stuff is in micro doses everywhere. Um, yeah, I mean, my problem with the tariffs here is that he's kind of using them as a stick for one of our two biggest trading partners, really our top three biggest trading partners if you count China, which we'll
oh
discuss here
yeah,
in a second. But Mexico makes total sense to me, like wanting to use the stick a little bit. And when I say makes sense, I mean it's more justifiable to the American public, especially when you give like account of like why Trump won. A huge reason is this like hatred towards the crisis at the southern border, fentanyl, immigration, and whatnot. So he's trying to figure out a way to get a win out of this that's relevant here. So, like in all honesty, outside of the 10,000 troops committed by both countries, Caitlin Collins at CNN had a really good second segment about this. The only thing that Canada changed was they committed more troops to get to Trump's 10,000 mark, and they have to have a new position called the fentanyl czar. But everything else, Justin Trudeau announced in December, and he said, "Yeah, we're trying to curb the fentanyl coming over from America to Canada. So we're going to invest in drones and surveillance technology and monitors." Um, I mean that to me, it just once again we're going through the Trump cycle, man. It's declare a crisis, threaten action, make a fucking phone call, nothing changes fundamentally, and then declare victory. And we're at the declare victory step here. Um, and I don't understand the Canadian one at all because I think maybe he thought that it would push their citizens to want to be like a member of the 51st state. But from everything I've read, it's led to a more like nationalistic uprising within the country. Like they're almost looking for someone to stand up for Canadian independence, which
Oh yeah.
a little
Yeah.
funny to be honest with you.
Well, I've heard the same thing that if it was the goal to create internal friction, it's really only gave them a rallying cry. But I don't know. I mean, if I'm being charitable, surely there was an underlying, goal or something, and then with Canada, and then these, perhaps fentanyl was just the pretext. So maybe he wants to somehow renegotiate USMCA or that
Hey,
that
who negotiated that, by the way?
well, that was Trump.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So
Couldn't remember though.
perhaps he no longer finds the terms of the agreement acceptable. But that's what some people have been speculating. I to to me, it sounds like perhaps the only logical. I mean, how? Maybe I'm trying to apply rationality where it doesn't,
Where
where
it
it
doesn't
does.
apply, right?
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, as far as Mexico goes, obviously we need to curb the flow of people coming in. 10 million people just came in. That's over double the population of our state. That's just insane. So
Right.
I'm all for, you know, you know, carrot versus the stick. If I'm all for using the stick to, get our way, but I just to reiterate, we're just burning political capital when doing this to Canada. Canada has done no wrong. I mean, it's
Right.
really just one of the dumbest.
And
I don't
not
get it.
to cycle it again, but I mean, there's no benchmark for cancellation. There's no like this is basically just going to be a reusable stick that Trump is going to use to get his way with Canada, to get his way with Mexico. He won't be able to do it as much with China, I don't think, because China obviously is a much bigger global economic player than either Canada or Mexico.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Which is why he's kind of not really commenting as much on China, because he's pretty sure the bluff isn't going to work. Um, and that's my, I still don't know if this is a bluff or if this is like one of those things where he was like, I don't care if I'm going to put tariffs on you, but like I would rather not put tariffs, but this is not a bluff. Like I will do it. I still have no idea. Which is, I don't know. Like if I was Canada or if I was Mexico, like the only hope they had to resist this type of thing is if they like came together in a coalition with like the European Union and China, like I don't know how they were supposed to resist this because the threat of like Trump's stick, access to the US economy was just too big to battle by themselves, at least.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, if it, I mean, they had to capitulate. I mean, I've seen statistics. It's like nearly 80% for both countries. 80%, less so for Canada, I think, but of exports for Canada and Mexico go to the U.S. So, I mean, it would just be devastating to levy a 25% tariff on their goods. Even though, I mean, with tariffs, ideally they would be targeted, to a specific industry. But, when it's a blanket like this, all that does is, I mean, effectively all that does is like punish American consumers because, take like guacamole and, coffee, I guess, in the case of Colombia. But avocados for Mexico, we don't really have a lot of domestic anything really meaningful domestic avocado growth. I mean, that's due to our climate, versus their climate. So it's not like we could build like a domestic avocado like powerhouse that could, it's
Yeah.
all that
See,
all that does is just punish the American consumer. And yeah,
See,
it's
and
so.
I think that this scenario right now, like what you just described, that was like a traditional view of tariffs. Like the reason we're putting a tariff is because we want to either A, protect American industries here, right? Or
Mhm.
or incentivize like a kickstart of those industries, right? Um that there's no way that that's what this is. And the only reason I say that is because these are blanket tariffs with minor exceptions. So, like Canadian energy, for example, is tariffed at is threatened to be tariffed at 10%, not at 25, right? Um, I think that this idea is he's truly trying to do this as like a revenue driver to justify getting rid of the income tax. Um, and I think the problem with that is he doesn't know how that works and how that would affect our budget because we have roughly a $3.5 trillion budget, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
tariffs account for roughly less than 2% of that. You could throw all these tariffs to 25-30% for the globe. They wouldn't even get to half of what the income tax does. Um, and this is just flawed thinking, right? Because he also thinks that this is going to help our trade deficit, and it's like, well, yes, that might be true. I still don't think that it's going to flip it to where we're a trade exporter, right? All it's going to do is hurt American consumers, right, with higher prices and the same quality goods, which is supposed to be not what America's all about. The entire like focus of this country for the past 100 years has been free trade, low cost for the same quality goods. You know, the only way this makes sense is as a stick, right? And he's gonna do it until somebody calls his fucking bluff. Because if nobody calls his bluff, why would he not? Why would he not use it, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I fear the day when people might. I mean, alone nobody can. I mean, they really have no choice to capitulate. But I'd really hate for them to start turning towards China. Uh, More so than they already have. I mean, so many South American countries in the last, yeah, couple decades have turned to China as their main trading partner.
Right.
It's
Well, if I may, I could just add like a small idea onto that. So if you remember the tariffs on China during Trump's first term, right? So the
Mhm.
Chinese, to get around this, after the USMCA, they just started importing their stuff in factories in Mexico. They're basically just shipping factories, like little warehouses that they use to get past the export tariff. So I think, maybe this is another goal at that, um, because this is basically, and the only reason I say that that's relevant to what you said is because this has dramatically increased trade with Mexico with China, right? Like they're becoming
Mhm.
greater trade partners as a result of the previous tariffs. So I think when we back Canada, Mexico, China into a corner, it's going to, out of necessity, either push them to unity, capitulation, or to our enemies, you know?
Oh yes, yes. Yeah, not certainly not the moves I would be making. I mean, if like I said last podcast, I mean, if there were like some grand vision of like restoring American manufacturing and, maybe like working with Congress to pass bills to uh well, it's kind of like with the Chips Act, that was a direct action to like boost a specific industry, so there was like some vision there. Uh
Right.
but that just doesn't seem to be the case in this point. It really is just a means of punishing to get what you want. But in the case of Canada, I mean, what we got wasn't, in my opinion, was not worth the political capital we expended. So it's been a blunder, in my opinion. But at this point, I think I've probably repeated myself. I don't know if I have too much more to say on the tariff matter since it's basically been postponed for a month. I guess we'll see what happens next. I All I can say is I'm a little disappointed, but I'm glad it's been delayed, and hopefully the tariffs don't actually take full effect because uh, I just don't see it ending well. It's yeah.
Yeah, and this will be my last word really too. There's been a couple of economic studies on the potential impact of like US GDP and prices based on these tariffs if they were enacted. So let's say in 30 days the pause ends and Trump's like, that's it. I'm not seeing enough results. We're imposing these tariffs, right? Which is a
Mm-hmm.
hypothetical. We could see gas shoot up minimum 30 cents up to $1 instantly.
Yeah.
That's based off demand as of today. Um, the price of anything plastic related, because that's the type of oil we get from Canada as well. That could shoot up about 8 to 10%. U.S. GDP as a whole could drop 2%, which is like that would be the first time since, gosh, I don't even know if '08 was that, or yeah, '08 was that bad. Um, you know, I
Yeah.
uh Now, granted, the Mexican, Canadian, and the European Union economy would have about 4% each, right? In terms of like loss of GDP, so they would be hurt far worse than we would. But the principle of the study is that like if these tariffs weren't active, there is no winner. We're all just slightly worse, you know. Um,
Yeah.
and they've even showed that in some of these studies that China would be doing better because they would be forced to trade with the European Union more. They would increase their Belt and Road Initiative. It just kind of depends on what route they take. But moral of the story is that if enacted, these are not good for anybody, especially American consumers.
Oh yeah. Well, full agreement here. For the next topic, do we want to talk about Elon Musk's his, I guess, growingly expansive role in the government? Uh,
Yeah, sure. Do you want to kick it off or?
well, I guess I'll give the summary or and some quick thoughts. And I think there might be a little disagreement between us here, actually, maybe mild disagreement. But I'll give my thoughts, and so maybe this will be a little more entertaining segment since we were so agreeable on the first one.
Right.
But so basically, Elon and many of his henchmen have basically taken control of uh, departments within the government, and one of the things they've taken control of is this uh, Department of Treasury's like proprietary software they use to like disperse funds,
Right.
I guess is how I would describe it. And uh, so basically, what he's doing is he's kind of like re- routing Congress in terms of like he can stop payments on a dime, like that they've already appropriated, and he can basically be like, nope, I don't want to pay that, therefore we won't. Uh, and Trump doesn't seem to be, from what I can tell, willing to really limit him all that much. I haven't really seen any pushback. And one of the things that uh, Elon has railed against was this USAID, which is the
Right.
United States Agency for International Development,
Hmm.
or something. And basically, they handle a whole host of issues. I mean, like, there's things like they give like AIDS medicine to people in Uganda. They try to, I mean, there are like war torn areas, in like Sudan that they help out with. Uh, Places like Cambodia, I think they're doing like disease treatment, a whole host of like humanitarian
Right.
objectives. And basically, it's, you think of like the carrot and the stick. Well, this is the carrot, I guess. It's like if you're friendly to the US, well, you can get all these nice little freebies, and relatively, it doesn't actually cost us way too much to fund these programs. So it is a good tool of, I guess, soft power, you would call it. Uh, and I guess I'm ambivalent, or I have mixed feelings about this, because on one hand, I see the value in international aid, and giving freebies and stuff to poor and developing nations so that we can apply pressure on them to do good theoretically in the future, or to align with our interests. But on the other hand, I do sympathize with, I guess, Doge's overall goal of reducing the deficit, so our revenue, the gap between our revenues minus our expenditures, our expenditures are much higher than our revenues. So we've had to, I think, issue debt in the realm of like 2 trillion per year, roughly. I mean, now it might even be more.
Sure.
Uh, so on one hand, it's like, well, these programs are valuable, and it seems almost cruel in a way to roll these back. I mean, you got to think, there's going to be some child who was like born with AIDS who will likely die, who will die if we roll these back.
Correct.
On the other hand, it's like, well, we do have prima facie, obligations, so, certain things are in some ways more important, and paying our being able to actually pay our debts, which is something that, if our spending compared to the money we take in, if these deficits continue, then somewhere in the future, I don't know when, but there could be a debt default. and then global poverty will skyrocket because if the American, if we default on our payments, the whole financial system crashes. So I I'll sum it up with this: I'm sympathetic to the cause, but it is going of like limiting expenditures, but it's going to be really painful in some ways, and it's a shame that uh, basically a lot of people are going to die in the process. But
Right.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I would just to comment back on some of the stuff you said. I understand that the deficit is of concern to many Americans, particularly those on the right who elected Trump, at least partly to hone in on this deficit, right? At least, that's what they state, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, the problem I have is that the avenue in which they are, or the mechanism in which they are going after the deficit is borderline. It's definitely unconstitutional. It might be illegal. Um, and I've heard several hit pieces on this. You know, the fact that you can just walk into Treasury as basically just a friend of the president. Like Elon Musk doesn't hold any appointed position by Congress. He, wasn't sworn in anywhere, like I don't even know, have they even created Doge yet? I'm not even sure. But the fact that he can just walk in there and now he has sensitive data, secured data on virtually every American. He has access to Social Security, government contractors, and people who are his competitors. By the way, Medicare benefits. You know, it, if you were, and I don't mean you specifically, if the right was genuine about solving this issue, because let's be real here, let's call a spade a spade. Elon's role here is only going to marginally cut the deficit. His team of five is not going to cut this thing down $1 trillion, right? Yeah. And like if you are somebody who's like taking this seriously, like you said, like, there is a way to actually attack this. And unfortunately, it's not the way, like there is no constitutional power for the executive branch to just take down whatever payment it doesn't want. So part of this comes into Trump is a believer in what's called unitary executive theory, which basically means that the president is more like a king and less like a third member of a co-equal branch of government, right? Um, and that's how they're treating this presidency. Is what it looks like. Is that so like when Congress, here's how it's supposed to work in theory, right? And this is more for our listeners. Congress passes a law that says we're going to give $50 billion to say Ukraine, right? Then it goes to the president after it passes both houses. The president signs it, and then the Supreme Court says, "Yep, nothing unconstitutional about that." And then it goes to Treasury to actually get sent to Ukraine. Does that make sense? And the problem is this money that Musk is going after has already passed every single one of those steps, which is what makes it borderline illegal. Um, Now, I say borderline illegal because Trump is the head of the executive. He's not going to charge Elon Musk, right? Like, there's not a prayer of that happening. But there is no mechanism for the president to just be like, actually, I'm not going to do that, even though it's already been signed by a president and agreed to by a Supreme Court. I'm not going to honor that. And that is unconstitutional, like for a fact. So, in other words, Elon Musk and Trump are treating this as, you know, the budget that Congress passes is more like it's more like a suggestion than a binding piece of law. Which that would, if they take this to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court sides with Trump and Elon, that's going to change the fundamental way our government works. Because you've probably heard of the power of the purse. Well, Congress throughout all of our history has had the power of the purse. In other words, they choose where money goes. The only role the executive branch has is to have Treasury send the funding there because Congress is just there to pass laws. The executive is supposed to execute the laws that Congress passes. And this is not controversial. This is not some Marxist, Leninist, interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. This is universal. Well, that's what Elon said. Elon said that this idea that I don't have the power to do this is Marxist, and it doesn't make any sense. And like I said, I am sympathetic to people like yourself, and I know many people who are like, we've got to get this deficit under control because if we default, then that the whole world's gonna fucking collapse for at least a decade or a half a decade, whatever it is. My problem is that like their way of going through that is not going to get the job done, even to your own goals. So, like, you want a reduced deficit. This is just going to marginally. So, like, for example, U.S. aid, right? USAID, right? It only accounts for
Oh
like
yes.
less than it's like 0.5% of the budget. It's not gonna. I mean, what the fuck is that gonna do, Darren? I mean, fuck, that's less than the tariffs. Um, it's
Well, I will.
way. What's up?
Oh my. Well, I will certainly concede that. The USAID, cutting it alone will certainly not solve the problem. And uh, while I will say, I guess to be charitable, you do have to start somewhere. I think if you're not willing to touch entitlements
Darren, we're not even
primarily,
sure that this is
and
legal.
then the military.
We're not even sure that this is
Oh, well,
legal.
see,
You
my
know?
thing is I know it. I mean, I understand. It's pretty I mean, I don't I it's unconstitutional. It to me it seems unconstitutional, but I don't really care. Like
I knew that was gonna be. And listen, hey, listen, you're 100% not alone in that. Like there are, first of all, these people don't even know what the Constitution is who voted for Trump. Like the idea that they're gonna care that this is unconstitutional or legal, they're just gonna care that Trump reduced the deficit. You know, like that's
yeah.
they're gonna be like, graph go down, good. Like that's all they're gonna know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. And here's the thing, like and this kind of just plays into my, you know, beliefs in general. I'm more in favor of authoritarian rule, and this seems basically like a step in in that direction. Like you were saying, if this goes to the Supreme Court and they somehow side with Trump, even though I don't really, I, 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 I don't think they would. The Supreme Court does seem to still have some of its they do seem to still follow the Constitution, and I do believe it is probably unconstitutional. But if it did go to the court and they sided with him, I would think that would be a step in the right direction because like going back to like entitlements, no elected official will ever cut those, and nobody will ever get elected running on cutting that. The only way somebody could get elected and do it is if they tricked the voters,
Right.
basically. Which, I'm not totally opposed to doing, but I mean, uh, it'll be hard to vote for someone who will cut entitlements if you don't know they're actually going to do it. So I think moving to more like autocratic, authoritarian rule where somebody has a term in office for decades rather than just 4 to 8 years, so they can like really like impose their vision upon the country and they don't have to worry so much about getting ousted or losing political capital or worrying about the midterms. So, worrying, oh, am I going to lose seats in Congress? Because, sometimes unpopular things need to happen for the greater good. And basically, in a democracy where everyone's worried about the next 2 years, presidential election, then midterms, then presidential election again. You're never going to be able to solve these really fundamental problems that are going to like kind of shape generations by how you choose to fix them. And this is kind of a rabbit hole because this is kind of off the topic of Elon, but
No, no, no. I don't think it is
even
actually. I don't think it is.
okay, well, like even if you lift the cap on the Social Security tax, I forget exactly what it is, but it's like past like 250K, I want to say. It's been a while since I've been read up on these particular facts, but I believe it's like past 250K. Your the degree to which you're taxed for Social Security does not go up. Well, even if they lifted that cap, that will kick the can down the road for a few decades, but ultimately this problem will appear again, especially since people are not reproducing. And, you know, that could change. People might start reproducing again,
It
but I
it
don't see it happening.
no, no,
So,
no, no. You're at no. You don't understand these social security tables. That's a point that I keep hearing. Like the fact that social security is at all related to birth rates is just not true. The only way it can even be closely related to birth rates is if there is a cap. Because if there's no cap, then it just has to do with the total wealth of the country. Which, unless you're expecting the total wealth of the country to eventually go down or like flatline, then we have something to worry about. But if you lift the cap, right,
mhm.
then it doesn't matter if our birth rate is declining like it is, which I concede. Then it wouldn't matter as long as the wealth goes up, the total wealth of the nation goes up because they'll just be taxed on that wealth. You know, um, does that make sense? Like,
Well, yeah, I do see your point there. I do see your point there, but
and I think
I
there's a lot of good evidence that if you lift it, just simply removing the cap would like push this can down the road, as you like to say, for like almost 150 years. Like your kids' grandkids won't have to worry about Social Security, you know? Like, um,
well, I do hope that is the case. I do hope that is the case, and uh, I would certainly be thrilled if it is. But and this goes in, and let's say for sake of argument, then that is the case. I think the only way to enact that reform, I well, you could go the democratic way. You could get that in a democratic way, but you would have to limit the power of these very rich individuals to influence politics.
sure. Um, and I concede to you that there is like some structural disadvantages to a democracy built like ours is, where you're constantly worried about the next 2 years. And listen, like there's representatives everywhere that are like, I would vote yes for this because I believe this, but my election is in 6 months and there's no way. Like I'll catch hell back home if I did. That there's probably at this point thousands of clips of politicians saying that. Where it's like, yeah, like I would have done that. But I guess here's my, and I'm gonna go down a bit of a rabbit hole here. But you bear with me. Um, my problem is that a guy like a singular person like an Elon Musk or even a Mark Zuckerberg or a George or a yeah, is it George Soros, right? Um, any one of those guys having the power that they do with a single person being held unaccountable is a problem. And it's a fucking problem. And let me just give you an example. This will be a great way to kind of visualize what happened. So around the mid 2000s, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they decided they wanted to get into like public education, specifically high school education and elementary school and middle school education.
Mhm.
So they
Oh
so
yeah, Common
before
Core.
exactly Common Core. Um, they bumped potentially billions of dollars into this program. They cited they did not consult educators or academics on like how to do this. They tried to basically move towards privatization in terms of like performance standards, standardized testing instead of like conceptual testing, where instead of like teaching things to have like a concept grasp or a critical thinking grasp, they're more like a memorization based thing. And so your lesson plans are taught to the test instead of actually learning it. And the problem is that exactly what you would think happened is test scores kind of flatlined and then decreased because kids aren't actually learning anything. And, I don't know if you know what the Rand Corporation is, but it's a libertarian based organization similar to the Heritage Foundation. And they did like a full deep dive into this over like 2 decades, basically. And they came back and they said, big mistake, big fucking mistake. We should have listened to educators. We should have listened to teachers. We should have listened to academics. Like, this is not good. And we don't know how to fix it. That was the conclusion of their study. So we don't know how to fix it now. Um, and I say all that to say this. I'm sure you're like, what the hell does that have to do with Musk? The fact is that Elon Musk, just like Bill and Melinda Gates, they might genuinely think that this is a good thing and they're working to better education and their heart may be in the right place. I might concede that. But the fact is that if you swing and miss with one of these billionaires, there are zero consequences for them. There's no repercussions, there's no nothing. So as warm as his heart may be, it's too fucking dangerous to let them have that level of unaccounted power. You know that it's you can't do it. It can't be done.
Yeah, uh, yeah. I mean, I can't really think of any way in which Bill and Melinda Gates were penalized for that. On the other hand, I mean, take George Bush. I mean, was he ever really held like accountable for like the Iraq War? Uh, so if it's a matter of accountability, I would already say that there's basically no accountability, anyways.
Well,
Uh,
I guess my point, like, even greater is that, like, if they're, we should not let them have that kind of power to just unilaterally change the fundamental structures of our society. I mean, that just can't happen. It's too fucking dangerous, dude. It's we don't even have a positive benefit. I don't know, outside of the New Deal, right? Like,
oh yeah, well, Musk in particular is, I mean, as sympathetic as I can be to some elements of his agenda, I mean, it's just so obvious that he's really just in this for, personal enrichment, I mean,
true.
I mean, there's no way that he's going to be cutting funding to any like grant, federal grants that are going to go to him, even though you could argue, although I would disagree, but you could argue that, SpaceX is basically a waste of money or is wasting money because I've seen clips where Elon will promise X thing by X date, and basically he should be a little further along, or actually a lot further along than he is by now. I mean, we should. Uh, I mean, from what he's promised in the past, I mean, we should be getting fairly close to reach, having a manned mission to Mars. So
Right.
yeah, we're pretty far away from that, unfortunately, and I don't see it happening anytime soon. So I will say there is that danger present, and personally, I would prefer that in the shift towards uh, autocracy, that I'm more so in favor of conceptually, just in terms of like governmental efficiency. I would prefer it not be like billionaires that make the push, but rather like actual government officials who like, maybe you have like disagreements with like what their the specifics of their ideology, but ultimately they're not in it just for enrichment. They're in it for the prosperity of the nation.
Mhm.
So yeah, there is a unique threat posed by billion by billionaire. I will concede.
Right.
Uh,
No, I get that. And well, one of the things I just wanted to ask you, just to kind of piggyback off of that, I don't think that this would help you in that case because I mean, surely you've seen the all the like firing and the buyout options for the federal workforce, right?
yeah, I mean, I get it as part of the vision, part of the agenda, but I mean, if he just, I mean, it was like what 2 million employees got sent this option, this buyout option. It's like there's no way in this short amount of time that they could have really assessed the risk of what if all 2 million accepted the like 8 month severance package and like dipped.
Right.
That would cause extreme inefficiencies, to
Yeah, I
say the
mean,
least.
you're talking two-thirds of our government right there. I mean, 2 million out of the 3 million total. Um, and one of the things that I was reading, do you know how long the average tenure is of a federal employee?
I would imagine it's close to lifetime. People typically get into it because that's
It's a
what
good
they
gig,
like.
right?
Yeah.
It's around 12 years. Um, which
Oh,
is
okay.
pretty nuts. That's
That's pretty good. That's
extremely
pretty good.
high, right? And I think that this is something that people like most of the rest of Americans who work in the private sector don't really understand is when you're working at one of these big federal agencies, like you are literally a civil servant. Like you are dedicated. And listen, I'm not saying that every single one of those 3 million people is perfect, but by and large, like your dedication to that agency is much greater than most everyone else's dedication to the country in terms of like that being our metric, right?
Hmm.
The reason you would go into something like that, take the shitty pay, probably decent benefits, right? But
Oh yeah, I'm sure the benefits are amazing.
the reason you would go into something like that is because hey, this is something that you care about, you know, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
the fact that he's firing the people that he's firing. I mean, I've got a list here. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission board member, her chair didn't run out until 2028. He just went ahead and fired her just to be fucking cuz. 17 inspector generals, which that's basically the job of Doge. I mean, they're supposed to conduct audits, investigations, like within government agencies to see if there's any hoopla going around, and then report that to the DOJ. Um, can't can't imagine why Trump would want to get rid of those guys. Um, over 12 prosecutors at the FBI, and there's no telling how many FBI agents. They're still tallying that, but it could be as much as over half of the FBI um, is going to get ousted. 160 National Security Council detailees. These are people who basically just fill out forms and data for briefings for the president. So, Trump is in some sense controlling what information he gets sent up. Um, 56 of the Foreign Aid Agency USA. Oh, so sorry, the U.S. Aid Agency, right?
Hmm.
56 have been let go. The rest of them got an email that said not to come back to work. So they're already pretty much done. And then, of course, the NLRB chairwoman also got let go, um, which was extremely sad for me. Um,
Oh yeah, you care about unions and stuff, so
yeah, that was, of
yeah.
course. I don't even understand that one to be honest with you. And then this is the last one, and then I'll let you piggyback off of this. Two senior officials at the Treasury were sent on leave One of them resigned. He's been here since Bush Senior was inaugurated. So that's 1989. And so you're talking about a lifetime civil servant who basically his crime was telling Elon Musk, like, you don't have any right to be here or have access to this data. This is a security issue. The reason I'm denying you. And so Trump had him, put on leave, and he eventually retired. He said, I'm not dealing with this. And that happened to two people, but one of them, my understanding is he hasn't resigned yet. So, or been let go yet. And
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
no problem with this level of firing, or you think it's good, or
I have mixed feelings about it, but right now I would say my feelings are majority negative. I imagine with 3 million employees, there just has to be some glut. There
sure,
are definitely people that can be ousted and probably should be. On the other hand, there are places where we need more federal employees. So I believe, like air traffic control, that's, managed, yeah, it's a federal agency, or part of a federal agency. So
right?
I think I think the statistic I heard was that we're 3,000 short in this country of those.
That's so terrifying.
Oh yeah, definitely. And so it's like, well, I mean, in some areas we need more employment. So, uh, while I do understand like wanting to, like save money and be more efficient, and because, there probably are people that honestly are just total leeches to the taxpayer. They probably play on their phone all day, but
Sure.
it's not, to me, it's just not that big an issue. So, I mean, it's not good, but I mean, compared to like, waste in other areas, I mean, does it even reach top 10 issues facing the US? I don't think so.
Right.
Uh, and back to like how I said earlier, I mean, if you're not gonna, if your objective is to cut costs, but you're not getting serious about entitlement reform, so rather taxing people more to fund it, or just slashing it in general, or even touching the military, then you're just not serious. So uh, it's one of those things. It's like on one hand, like I am sympathetic, but
Yeah.
yeah, my overall view of it is negative, honestly.
Yeah, and like you said, like there are people who want to. I would argue to say that most Americans. I don't know the data, but I'm sure you could find a poll that says a pretty big majority of Americans want to lower the deficit. Right. The problem you run into is whenever you ask them, like, well, what do you want to cut? Because let's be real. I mean, that's basically the answer, right? Is this is going to require a combination of raising taxes and cutting to get to net zero.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
and it's not impossible. I mean, Bill Clinton did it for 3 years, right? Or two and
Oh
a
yeah.
half, whatever it
Oh
was.
yeah.
Um, it's not impossible. It just requires a little bit of restructuring. Um, and he had a fairly good economy. So,
Oh
um,
yeah.
I just think that the problem is you're going to have fundamental disagreements about where to cut because there will be people that tell you that like if you cut the fucking military, like is going to fucking come back to life and start doing acts of harm against American citizens, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. We just have to be airstriking these like Somalian like huts,
Yeah,
like,
we have to
literal hovels.
send $1 billion jet on top of like a $40 hut. Um, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But the other thing that you'd have to do is you'd have to figure out like what parts of entitlements would you like to cut because how I don't know how you're going to do that and then win the next election. Um,
Oh yeah.
it'd be
Oh
impossible.
yeah.
and they're out of the political football, so they're a part of non-discretionary spending, which for our audience that may not know. So whenever they come up with a budget every couple of years, whenever they're picking and choosing like what to cut, what to add, right, or like how much debt to add, non-discretionary spending is already like promised. Like you can't make that a part of the political football. You would have to do that after the budget, um, and that would go into effect the next budget cycle. But in terms of like non-discretionary spending, that's only like $800 billion, which I'll concede is a fair amount of money. But I mean, hell, the deficit's more than that. You know, you know
Oh
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And that just goes to your point. You're gonna have to cut entitlements. There's some entitlements, some military, and it'd be a mix. But you're gonna have to cut, a mix, right?
Oh yeah. And well, we're just going to have to be taxed more, unfortunately. I mean, there's no world in which this we can persist with this low rate of taxation. I mean, we're going to need value added taxes. So, that's a tax on points of production. When a good is assembled, uh, we're going to need that. We're going to need to raise taxes probably across the board. So not only just the wealthy, but also the poor. I mean, they're going to have to chip in more, as they should, in my opinion. I mean, if you if you look at the share of, and I get, it's regressive and all that, but I mean, if you look at the share of like the total like income tax that comes in, I mean, the bottom like 50% hardly pay anything compared to the top 1%. Uh, so we're just going to need everybody to chip in, and especially the wealthiest among us. I do recognize their immense contribution. I think the top 1% pay 20% of total revenues or something. So in some respects they definitely do pay their fair share, but we will have to tax them more just because that's where the money is.
No, for sure. And listen, and I hear what you're saying about how like the poor have got to kick in a little bit, and they do at the local and state level. There's just no getting around those taxes. But at the federal level, like, can they
Oh
chip
yeah.
in? Sure. But I got to be honest with you, it wouldn't because of the little amount of wealth they have.
Oh
It's
yeah,
not
it,
going to
it
make a
wouldn't make much of a
difference,
dent.
right? You would be much better off going after the top half of that back, or the top half of that spectrum. Um, but I do got to say, so yes, do the top 10% pay the most in taxes? Like, yes. But also, they hold a disproportionate amount more of the wealth. So I'm fine with increasing that just to keep, the disparity down. And honestly, like I'm a fan of, and we can kind of wrap up the whole thing on this is I don't mind using taxes as a form of like wealth redistribution because if you think about them, that's what they are, right? Right now, the way our government is set up, it's a way to take money from the young and productive to the old and the entitled, right?
Oh yeah,
And
hundred
that's
percent.
just
Yeah.
my opinion, and I'm not even saying that that's a bad thing. Like the listeners may not know because this is new, but I'm a strict defender of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Um, but that doesn't change the fact that that's what our system is, and I would like to see that system more like means tested. So, like in other words, I would like to structure our taxes in a way that target more of the billionaires, the oligarchs, so that way we can cycle this money back down to the lower and middle class. And not directly, but through ways like increased infrastructure, housing development to make homes more affordable. Um, but I, I guess off on a little bit of a rant there, but yeah, I would basically change our taxes, and I'm fine with higher taxes. I think, damn it, they're necessary. I mean, these taxes are historically low for America.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I'll be the first to say, I mean, it would hurt, but we do need to be taxed more in this country. There's just no. I mean, the way we're going. and I'll end on this. It's you know the debt will become a much bigger problem uh, in the not too far future if this isn't resolved. So hopefully somebody comes along with the will to just say, hey, everybody needs to be taxed a little more, and some segments of the population need to be taxed a lot more in order to fix this problem. So
Yeah, 100%. The problem is there, of course, the sell. How do you sell it, or do you do what you said and just lie about it and then do it anyway? Which might be the only way to do it, but it would be
yeah,
it would be career suicide. But you could
oh
do it,
yeah, it'd
you
be
know.
suicide for the party of whoever did it too.
Yeah, probably.
So
Um,
everybody's ass would be on the line, but
yep. But